change we need to go through actually impacts others. So regardless if we're avoiding change or if we are chaotically creating change in our lives, we are fundamentally keeping that knowledge and understanding of our change from being reflected into the collective. Our change, our growing is needed for others to grow and to learn.
Everyone, it is the Ego Project, where we do the perfectly imperfect work of healing our ego wounds. And I am Lisa Heidle, and I'm here with
Cristine Seidell.
Our topic today, the foreboding C word.
Let's get the word change out there real quick.
Change. Okay. Is there any word that gives more fear in people? It's like, you need to change. It's like, I can't change. What is that?
Or your schedule needs to change, or the season's about to change, or whatever.
The relationship is changing much. Okay. So the topics we're going to talk about today, everyone, is one, of course, the topic of change, right? We're going to be talking about our own experiences, recent experiences that she and I are having with change. We're going to be talking about the ego processing. And then we're both going to give some reflective questions to help our listeners move through change. And once again, make it not so foreboding, not so frightening. Right. Yeah. So Cristine, I'm going to ask you, talk a little bit about your most recent changes.
The change of motherhood within myself too. That's something that has been coming up as the summer came to a close and my children went back to school, is recognizing I'm not in the season of motherhood of small little children anymore, that I now have, middle schoolers and my daughter is in college, and recognizing that transition of, early childhood motherhood into having adolescents and young adults. So a lot of awareness of change over here in the Atlanta area. So what about you, Lisa? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the change you've been experiencing?
Thank you. I have started traveling again. And for new listeners that don't know, I'm a digital nomad, and which means I travel and work at the same time. And I started doing this about 5-6 years ago. And then, of course, the pandemic hit and I ended up in one location for an extended amount of time. But now I'm back out and I'm moving around again. And it's bringing up a lot of questions for me. And I'm having to make a lot of personal changes. I'm getting feedback from people about what I'm doing again. And so for me, embracing that change is positive, and it also has some negativity to it, right? Some challenges, I would say. And so I'm going to ask you, are you someone who embraces change?
Depends on the change, right?
Oh, that's true. That's very true.
Yeah. I think that, probably in my younger years, change probably was a lot more difficult for me. Mostly around my belief of self, which again, when, on the Ego Project, we understand that the ego is the concept that we have of ourself, our beliefs around who we believe us to be. And that oftentimes has, identity in our giftedness and what makes us unique and special, but it also has the story of wounding. And so I think that in my younger adulthood, I really did struggle with change a lot more because it felt so uncertain, or it felt so compartmentalized as good or bad. There wasn't a lot of fluidity in being able to see change on a spectrum of experiences and the values within it. I think as I've grown and as I've done my own therapeutic work and have become a therapist helping others do it, I do embrace change, I think, with a lot more radical acceptance, as we like to say, in which I'm always open, I believe, to seeing what's available to learn, what's available to see, the goodness of that. But it may I still may have some things that take me a little while to get to that point where I have those automatic ego responses to the triggers of change.
Yeah.
What about you? How do you feel like you process through change in this season of your life?
Thank you. I am a slow changer. Very really snail-like. Yes. I really like to, I'm very much go inward. I'm an internalizer. I like to look at situations and turn them every direction, and then, make sure I'm looking at it and understanding. But once I go through that process and I recognize it is my process, I've tried it different ways. It never works. Okay, this is my process. Once I make the decision, it's instantaneous, and I am so at peace in my body when I get to that point when I know it's the right decision for me. And I just feel so aligned, and that is my tell. So I've learned how to somatically go in and feel it out. And if I still have some struggles in there, like I'm feeling pressure, I'm feeling like there's something stuck, I know I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
And as frustrating as that can be, and it can be frustrating, I want to move on, I want to move forward, I want to make decisions, and but once I make it and I get that peaceful feeling inside of me, I'm ready to go.
Good.
Good.
Right. I think that's that radical acceptance too, right? Of just accepting that this is the point I have to move forward.
Yeah, definitely. So let me ask you, with your clients that come in, and everyone, that's probably at the kernel of most issues, right? Is making changes. Can you talk a little bit about the ego processing that you witness with clients that come in?
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, a lot of times it doesn't matter what presentation of age or situation, there is some form of discomfort in change. And so from a therapeutic perspective, we understand that change tends to elicit the survival, functions within the body, right? So change automatically elicits this feeling of what do I need to be aware of and what do I need to be alert to, because there is an unknown, right? And in that unknowingness, we're trying to find some kind of security, something to grasp onto. And that can be where we end up going into our ego programming in the subconscious that may or may not be part of our wounding, right? So if it's a change in, let's say, a career, maybe we wanted that change, maybe we didn't want that change, maybe we sought it or it was presented upon us. We may go into the belief system of I can't go work anywhere else, I don't have the skills, I'm not in an age where I can start this. We'll start the belief systems where we want to protect ourselves. And that tends to come from our ego wounded parts that haven't really been addressed. But, our survival mode is needed, right? We do need to know what to be aware of and what to be alert to as we go into transitions and changes. Just like, back in our caveman days, when we were out of food and we needed to go seek it, there was a change in, the hunters and gatherers going out. You needed to be aware and alert that there could be woolly mammoth that comes out, right? So in changes and transitions, it is important to be aware and alert, but we don't have to stay in our survival mode. We can still go into our executive mode, which is, the mode of understanding and intuition and utilizing the patterns we've already picked up on in order to make sense of the reality of our situation, not the survival mechanisms that we kind of divert to. So therapeutically, when people come in and they're going through a season of change or a situation of change, they may be kind of stuck in a wounded play out of a story. to the point where it's keeping them from being able to move through change. Or, and this is something else I want to point out, we do sometimes have people that are constantly seeking change, right? So those may be people that are probably coming from the wounded ego as well, in that they are constantly seeking chaos because instability is so familiar to them.
Oh,
And those may be people who are kind of like, hey, you know what? I just need a lot of change in my life. I can't sit still. I have to constantly be, chasing something. I get bored easily, right? And we tend to, support them and as being adventurous and, oh, that's so cool. And look, they're starting this, but it can become very disruptive in not only their life and their ability to sit in stability, stillness, and peace, but also maybe the system that they are a part of. It may not be creating the stability that that system needs. So you can see we have oftentimes that internal and externalizer coming out in change as well.
So how would you guide someone who, one, struggles with making change? They stay stuck in situations, they stay too long at the party, basically. Like the lights are off, the chairs are on the table, and they're still sitting there.
Hanging there.
Yeah. And then you have the ones that, well, they like to hop from party to party to party, right? Yeah, using that analogy, staying with it. So how would you guide the first one who stays too long, right? Who needs to make some change? And how would you guide the one who really needs to sit in stillness and create some structure for themselves? So can you kind of give us some insight there?
Yeah, and I think that, what's fun about being a therapist is you get to be this reflective space for people who really intuitively want to feel more congruent, feel more aligned, but are stuck, whether it's stuck in a pattern of being stagnant or stuck in a pattern of seeking constantly. So for the first client who may be a little stagnant, is hanging out at the party, the lights are on, the music's off, you can't stay here, but you don't have to go home. For that client, really what it is, asking the client, what is the story that is continuing to come up, right? And asking them, what is the fear around change, really? And I always like to add the word really, because it tends to not be, well, like my schedule is just so chaotic already. I don't know if this would really work. Those situational things are very easy to work through fundamentally. Typically, it's a deeper belief system, which is, what if I can't make it out on my own? What if I don't have the skills it takes? What if this person doesn't really, doesn't answer my text or phone call? What if I do date this person for 6 months and then they ghost me? Right? So it's really around the belief system that I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy to receive the fruits of whatever this change is, or that the change will ultimately bring about harm, right? Some of us are conditioned in our wounding to believe that we're only ever allowed to receive awful things in this life. We're so unlucky, right? It'll never work out. This fundamental belief that we're not one of the charmed ones of this life, right? And I think we can recall times we've heard that.
So do those people perceive change as punishment?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes they perceive it as this divine, I don't want to use a certain word here, but a divine, curse that they have on themselves, that if change comes, it fundamentally will be bad. And what that belief is that fundamentally I am bad, right? And they can't always, most of the times they cannot pull that vernacular out, like I am bad. But if they believe that all that is destined for their life is awful, horrible things, and the lack, then they fundamentally believe that they are awful and they lack. So it's really helping the client see that negative belief system that is not true at all, and allowing them to have space to kind of like understand how that would be harmful to them, and that they've been hurting themselves, and then helping them put in a new programming. Well, I can understand how that would be scary, and that would make you feel like you didn't have the confidence, but I'm wondering what would help you see that you do have the skills. And tell me a time from the past that you met a challenge and you were successful at it. So really pulling out examples that point out that is not the case. We can believe something different.
That's good. And then for those who really struggle with routine in their life, and when I say routine, I don't mean being in one location, because as I said, I move around a lot, but I just my goal is to stay rooted within myself, which means I allow my values and my beliefs and how I interact with others to always be my guideposts. And that keeps me very structured and stable within myself. So those people who, are, very untethered and, they believe that change, which we get rewarded for in our culture, we're conditioned to, that person's adventurous, like you said. Well, where is that line? So can you talk a little bit about those people? And when I say those people, I do not remove me from that. Because I've also been that person as well. So people who struggle with giving themselves stability.
And I love that you pointed that out, that just because somebody from the outside sees change or transition, that doesn't mean that it fundamentally is truly change and transition, right? So an environment, moving, is that changing locations? Sure, but is that just geography? Is that just environment? Change really occurs when a significant shift happens, right? We have transactions, right? And I think for a digital nomad, you probably go and have experiences in different places and learn and grow from that, right? But not every single place probably is this big, huge shift. You may go to some places and be like, I'd be okay if I didn't come back here.
I'm not going to list those places, but there's quite a few. Yeah.
I'd be all right. So, I think what we want to, when we talk about change, it's not necessarily transactions, right? And somebody's external view of change may not necessarily qualify that. But I think why we celebrate people who tend to change quite a bit, right, is that we associate, because they're being actively moving, whether it's energetically, situationally, emotionally, that they're growing. And that's not always the case. And that's where the chaotic changers tend to not be growing, they tend to be avoiding. Right.
Ooh, that's powerful. That's very powerful, because how often do we see the couple that, builds the big house and buys the nice car and starts having children, and they're hitting all the milestones, but they're not happy, and you're not seeing this personal development that, is inherent when you embrace change and actually learn the lessons and grow from it. Oh, that's very powerful, Cristine.
Yeah. And so, when we see people that tend to be changing, I'm gonna start this business, and actually no, I quit that program, I'm actually gonna go do this, and then you see them do that for a little while, and then, oh no, actually that department head was not, it wasn't a good place, so I'm gonna go do this, right? Where you see a lot of shift and transition without a lot of intentionality, that tends to be somebody who is avoiding something, right? And you can sense, even if it's location, right? Like, oh, I'm going to move to California, and then they're there for 2 weeks. They're like, yeah, my apartment, it had mold in it, so I have to go to, Virginia or whatever, right? You're seeing them move quite a bit because of the reason they can't stay is because of something external, right? There's a reason externally they can't stay there, or it just didn't feel right, but they can't really delve deep into what's going on within them. And so when you work with that type of client, you want to reflect a little bit of rootedness into them. What would it mean to stay in this profession for another year? Oh, I could never do that. I would die, right? Like really, that surface level is that it's something they cannot do. And so really what's behind that is the fear that they don't have the fundamental worth, value, lovability to be able to show up there and be accepted and loved and celebrated. So that is the same type of programming that the other wounded ego has in its belief system that it can. And so even though we see movement, it's not necessarily rooted in something healthy.
So how would someone know that a decision that they've made is, or a change, whether it's thrust upon them or they've made it themselves, that it's a good change?
I think that's a great question. And I think that does take a little work to get to. And I think that's why we do find a lot of people that do have a lot of issues with change, whether it's fear or whether it's avoiding stability. When we have the externalizers that are seeking a lot of change, they're familiar with a lot of chaos. And so what would it mean to be in a situation that was really stable? They may not be able to recall what that feels like. Maybe their childhood was really chaotic, right? And so for people to just be able to pull up, what would it feel like to be okay with change? It's kind of this trial and error, and I think that's that intuitive pattern making that we are constantly building from the time, we're here is how do I feel? What is the peace and calm feeling that I have when I make a change that's truly right for me? And we know the feeling when we make a change and it still doesn't feel right.
Oh, yes, we do. Yeah,
Mhm.
we
Yeah.
do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I think there's lessons that are inherent in making the wrong decision as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm. Oh,
One of
absolutely.
my phrasings that helps me when I'm struggling making changes is, I'm willing to be wrong.
Mhm.
I'm willing
Mhm.
for this
Mhm.
not to be the right decision.
Mhm.
And that takes off a lot of the pressure from
Right.
making the right or wrong, that kind of, spectrum of, black
Yes.
and white, right? So,
Yes.
and that works for me. So I'm
Mhm.
willing for this relationship not to work out. And I'm
Yes.
also willing for it to work out.
Mhm.
I'm willing to, make a career shift
Mhm.
and, explore that, because I think there's something that I can learn there. And
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
willing to not make the career shift and try to build what I'm doing now. So, just the I am willing, 3 simple words
Yeah.
makes it so, just opens up the world. Yeah.
And I think, what ties into that belief system is also the understanding that the change itself is not the end all be all, right? It's the learning and the understanding that comes from going through the change. And the I am willing is that first component, right? I am willing. And therefore, what the learning and understanding is really the nugget there. It's not the actual change. Whatever the good or not so good outcome is of that, that's not the nugget. It's the learning and the understanding of what is truly aligned for you, right? And so I think when you talk about how can people do this in a better way, it's really understanding, I know that everything is for my greatest good, even if it's uncomfortable, even if there's pain and sorrow, I understand that it is for my greatest good. So if this decision for change or this movement of change brings pain, if it brings discomfort, I know that there is an understanding and learning that is truly the nugget.
That's so
And
good.
so that's helpful to help people move through the change without constantly staying in the old pattern belief systems.
Thank you. That's very good. I love that, because I think it's going to give people that understanding that there is a bigger process behind change. It's not the act of change. It's the lesson inherent in the change to help us grow. Yeah.
Correct. Which is why when we see chaotic change, we don't see exponential growth, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not the transaction of change that actually does the growing. It's the understanding and learning of the change.
So integration is at the heart of all of it, is at the
Yes.
heart of change. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, so good. So good. Thank you for talking about that bigger aspect of change, because I'm going to talk a little bit about dharma and karma.
I knew that was going to be a great
segment. That brings
Yeah.
it right together, doesn't it? So for those who don't know, I'm going to kind of give a little definition of dharma and karma from more of the esoteric belief, the more spiritual idea. And please know that there are so many layers to these words, and we throw them around, but this is rooted in Buddhism. It's rooted in a lot of spiritual beliefs. So we're going to use it today just to help us understand that broader scope of our growth through a spiritual lens. So dharma is basically, it's our essential nature. It's what we come in with, and it's embedded in that essential nature is our gifts, our purpose, what we're here to do. And change with dharma is so important. It's encoded in it. It's so important. And then we have the karmic. That's embedded. What's embedded in the karmic is the I must do it right.
Yes.
I can't make a mistake. I'll do it when I get guaranteed that it's all going to work out perfectly. Right? That's more karmic. And that doesn't, karma, the word that we're so familiar with is, consequence, right? But the karmic idea is very much embedded in the right and wrong that is given to us outside of us.
Right. Exactly.
Where our dharma, we know it. It's our values. It's inherent in us.
Yeah.
So kind of talking about that. So as an example, my dharma in this lifetime is to be a creator. I feel I know that no one, no matter what feedback I receive outside of me, I know deep in my soul, my higher self, whatever you want to call it, that is part of my dharmic lesson. And what
there's no influence from anybody else that would deviate that knowing.
So if I'm struggling, as an example, with my writing, that's part of my dharma, is to be struggling with it at that time. So and I am supposed to be learning something from that struggle. And so often we see it as something bad because of the change, right? That
may be uncomfortable.
Right, exactly. So what do you believe is part of your dharma in this lifetime, Cristine?
I would say, 100%, like the role that I hold as a therapist, and I call it as a healer, is definitely, part of my dharma. I think, mother, daughter, sister, all of these, I think, are so much of my identity that I don't have to, even in seasons of change where it may feel wobbly at times, I don't question like that is who I am. A friend, a leader, whatever it is, I own that. And so I love that you can bring in dharma, because it really is a reflection of the true self. It's your knowing of who you are, So yeah, I appreciate you asking me that.
Oh, and thank you for being so vulnerable and transparent with it. Because I know that you've done so much personal work, both on a therapeutic and a spiritual level. And when we say spiritual, we want to, reiterate that, this is more the idea of spiritualism, of personal growth, as opposed to
Right.
religion, and they can be intertwined, but really
Mhm.
it's about our own personal growth and
Correct.
connection with, the cosmos, if you will. And
Yeah.
so I agree with you. When I define myself
Mhm.
through my dharma, I
Mhm.
feel so excited about change and so trusting that I'm on the right path. Now,
Mhm.
when I shift into
Mhm.
that conditioned karmic
Right.
feeling,
Right.
right? Where, oh, I'm going to be judged. Someone's not
Mhm.
going to understand. They're
Yeah.
going to make fun of me. They're going to belittle me,
Mhm.
whatever the belief is, then it feels very uncomfortable to me.
Mhm.
And, we cannot say that enough, to go back into stillness, to go
Mhm.
back
Mhm.
into your body and
Mhm.
feel these things inside of
Right.
you. And
Right.
so, using our dharma as the boundary
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
where we begin and others end, and
Right. Right.
where, right? And
Yeah.
that is so powerful, right? That gives us so much control over the choices that we make
Right.
and
Right.
embracing change.
Yeah, almost like a protective like armor around that knowing, around that dharma,
Yeah.
and withdrawing to remember, that's that is truly what you can trust,
Yeah.
is that knowing.
And it moves you from a place of powerlessness
Mm,
when it comes to change, right? Like, oh, I lost my job. I feel powerless. Well,
mm,
your dharma is leading you to the next step in your life. And you, once again, stayed too long at that party, or maybe
mhm,
it was time and to move forward onto the next thing. And all of this is leading you to
mhm,
that higher level self actualization,
right,
right?
right,
That enlightenment, if you will. And
mm,
it allows us, at every time we go through these cycles of
mhm, mhm.
beginning, you know, being in a lesson and
Yes.
moving out of it, and
Mhm.
which is change, right? It's constant movement. Every time that we do that, it leads us to a higher level if
Yes.
we integrate
Yes.
the
Yes.
lesson that we were meant to learn there. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yep.
So
Yep.
I love the idea that, spirituality and, therapy to me are just lovely partners,
Oh,
because you can
absolutely.
do that higher level understanding of what we're here as individuals to share with the world. And we can
Right.
learn the skills to help us heal those
Mhm.
ego wounds. Because if we are trying to share our innate dharmic gifts with the
Mhm.
world from an
Yep.
ego wounded space,
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
it never works. It's
Yeah.
dangerous. It causes harm to ourselves and others.
Another, point I kind of want to bring up is that we have to remember that the change we need to go through actually impacts others. So, regardless if we're avoiding change or if we are chaotically creating change in our lives, we are fundamentally keeping that knowledge and understanding of our change from being reflected into the collective. Our change, our growing is needed for others to grow and to learn. We really aren't in this, solitude space in this world. We really are here as part of something that is bigger than us. And so when we keep ourselves, from the discomfort of change, or from the discomfort of a change that may actually be very stable, even though it doesn't look like movement, we're really, really keeping what is needed for ourselves from the collective as well.
Yes. And we do have individual dharma,
Mhm.
which is what we bring into the world, and it's our personal essence. And then we also have a collective dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And how often do we see that, right, in the collective dharma, where everyone does everything the same as everyone else, and then they judge people who do things differently, and because that change makes them uncomfortable.
Right.
How
Right.
often do we see that?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think we have to remember that, like, our learning and growing is not necessarily a belief system, right? It's a knowing. And our knowing always has peace, and it always has love, and it always has an understanding that is rooted in goodness, right? That doesn't mean it's a belief system, right? Because people will say, well, you know what, this is my truth. And then, that the aliens are X, Y, and Z, right? And that's my truth. And we have to, that dharma is very different than a belief. It is a knowing, and it is always rooted in goodness and love and peace, because that is truly what we are. Every one of us is truly good and loving and peace.
That's so beautiful. Thank you for that reminder, because we do so often hear that, where people, they get very rigid in their belief system, and that is a karmic belief system.
Right.
It truly is.
Yes, that's a great way of saying that. Yes.
The idea that my way is the only way to perceive a situation,
right,
or any example you can add to that is the right way. That's karmic.
Right.
We
Yes.
are all on our individual paths, and what is right for me may not be right for you.
Correct.
But that doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make me wrong.
Right. And it doesn't make you good and me bad.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it really, what you said is so important, because I've seen so many people in relationships where, contempt has grown, they're no longer growing together. They feel unhappy, yet, well, we are committed, and yet they're not doing any growing work. They're not doing any healing work, yet they refuse to release the person. And I'm like, oh, that is so karmic, because they hide behind, well, I've made this commitment. It's like, no, part of our growth is knowing when to release someone so that they can continue upon their dharmic path. And when they're holding on to someone, when they know the time has passed, when as a couple, you're no longer growing together, oh my goodness, you're not keeping that person from finding their next person who's going to love them in the way they deserve to be loved, for the person that they are today. And, I just see that. And thank you for saying that, because it's such a good reminder that our relationships are there to help us grow.
Yeah. And I think that's such a great example with relationships, because there even needs to be an awareness of our change, and our learning and growing is not superior or better to, or, it's not the best, because this person hasn't changed and grown at the same level that we think, so even in our goodness, we can stop focusing on that and be like, well, hold on a second, there's a way I can I can feel even better than this, right? And so I think that example of the relationship is also recognizing, if you're both changing and growing, that's great. It doesn't have to be this, very steady growth at the same rate. You can change and grow at different rates, but be able to come together in that change and growth to learn and understand the relationship better.
I so agree, because within a relationship as well, there's so much growth, even during those struggling times.
Correct.
Yeah. So thank you for making sure that people understand. I'm not saying if you're having trouble in a relationship, you just leave it, exactly. Because once again, I'm a slow changer. Okay. So, but there is, and I think we know when we've done everything that we can do in a situation. And, I think being able to get still, and within that stillness, figure out, where is my growth in this? and where
Yes.
is it their growth that's needed? And can, like you said, it's not, keeping steps with each other.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's everyone's doing it at their own pace. So
Mhm.
thank you for
You're
clarifying that. So
welcome.
appreciate it.
Welcome.
Well, I'm going to ask you, so you have some reflective
Mhm.
questions
Mhm. Mhm.
for our listeners. Can you go ahead and share yours, and then I'll share the two that I have?
Yeah. Yeah. So, when kind of thinking about ways that I try to help my clients navigate through a change that, you know, at this point they have radically accepted that they're willing to go through this change and to be a part of whatever, you know, growth and learning there is, doesn't mean that it's not scary anymore. So, something that I like to kind of ask my clients to do is, ask yourself, what part of me do I need to honor in this change, right? And the second question is, what is my non-negotiable through this change? And so I'll give you an example. I actually had a client prior to the taping of this that came in and was just devastated, was crying. She had lost her job, had just had the phone call in the car, which I was like, I'm so glad you were on your way to therapy, And, she was really devastated and was really in the wounded story of it's not fair. All these, things were playing out. And I said, well, what is it that you can honor about this change that is really in alignment for what you really want for yourself? What can you honor that this can provide you? And she has always wanted to go into criminal justice, and she's like, I just don't want to be doing this job. I really really want to be in criminal justice. And I was like, well, let's honor that part of you that really knows what's meant for you, what is true for you. Like you asked me, what is part of your dharma, right? That was the same question. What do you need to honor that is true for you? I don't want to be doing this job. I want to be in criminal justice. So what is your non-negotiable? My non-negotiable is I may need to make money on the side. I know I'll have to go to school, but I'm not willing to do XYZ work. Okay, that's okay, right? You can know that you're made for criminal justice, and you can know you don't want to do the work you were doing. Those two can coexist, and you can still move through change. So that's where, when you ask yourself those two questions and you answer them honestly, you don't answer them in your wounding, right? Because we have a lot of clients will like to come in and continue the wounding story, but I can't. So when you break it down to two very easy questions to tap into ultimately, right? And you keep confronting that part that's trying to avoid it, then you know what is true, what is part of your dharma in that moment, even if it's pursuing something, right? And you know what you're no longer available for, because it will keep you from going through change. We get stuck in jobs that are easy, but we get a paycheck, right? That's what she was saying. I know I can do this job, it's easy, but I don't want to do it anymore. I want to be in criminal justice. And that saying that to somebody is the most important piece, because now you're accountable to it.
That's so powerful, because how often do we get stuck in that loop, right?
Yes.
Where we keep replaying the story.
Mhm.
And there's so much in that, the embarrassment of losing your job, the
Yeah.
fear of, not having your income, the unknown. There's so much that's in there. And we have to feel those feelings. We
Yeah.
can't bypass,
Mhm.
right? Where, oh, it's great, no problem. It's like, and maybe for some people it is great, no problem.
Yeah.
But really,
Mhm.
inside of all of us, no one likes to feel rejected.
No,
No,
absolutely not.
so I
Yeah.
think that's so
People
good.
can sit in that for a long time, right?
Yeah. And then to move out of it, and then by asking yourself some very empowering questions. And I love non-negotiables. I
Mhm.
love them, because we don't have to have a lot of them,
Mm.
but the ones that we
Yeah.
have to be in stone
Yes. Yeah.
for, yeah. And, and usually thereby how I'm going to be treated. That's
Yes.
really what it comes down to. Yeah.
What about you? What do you think would be some reflective questions for somebody trying to navigate through change from more of a perspective of that spiritual conversation internally?
I love what the woman, she calls herself the alchemist, and she's on YouTube, and we'll add the link. She gives these two questions that I use all the time. And the first one is, how or why would I create this in my life?
Mm-hmm.
And at first you're kind of like, well, I wouldn't do this to myself. Well, yeah, you would, from a dharmic standpoint,
Yeah,
right? Like,
absolutely.
why would I need this in my life to have, why would I need to lose my job right now?
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, and even just saying the words, you're like, why would I? Well,
Yeah.
there's a reason behind it. And it may be because you're not on the right path.
Right.
It
You're not
was,
honoring a part of you that needs
yeah,
to be honored. Yeah.
it was keeping you stuck in a pattern that you've outgrown,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and maybe it's time for you to move more toward your gifts that you're here to share with the world. So there's a
Absolutely.
lot of responses that can go into that, and it's going to be different for each individual person, but asking yourself that question is empowering, right? And then the second one is, how can this serve me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And right, so as an example, with the pandemic, yeah, I ended up in one location that was not part of my nomadic plan.
Mm-hmm.
Was to be stuck. And I was stuck in a place that had a border between two countries. So I couldn't get out of the country I was in into the country I wanted to be in. So I was stuck. So I felt all the feelings, went through all the anxiety, processed through that. And then I said, how can this serve me? And I
Right.
got very still, and I waited for the answers to come to me.
I love that.
And then I moved into the next steps that I needed to take.
Mm-hmm.
But, and we all went through that. That was a collective dharmic experience, right? We all went through it.
Yes.
And and now that we're through it, I have the choice.
Mm-hmm.
Do I stay in that dharmic knowing, or do I shift back into the karmic?
Right. I love, yeah. I mean, just because you have a knowing and understanding doesn't mean you get to be like, well, there, I've done it. Did you guys see me do my dharmic knowing and understanding? I'm good. I've done mine. Your turn. Exactly. Right. But it's a cycle, right? We're regularly in a cycle. Yeah.
And our conditioning in our karmic culture has taught us that we are it's linear,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that our lives are linear, and only in the sense of the calendar pages
Yeah.
flipping is
Right.
linear, but our growth is not, and it's cyclic.
Yeah.
And we go through, just like the seasons in nature, we're constantly
Mm-hmm.
going through this and through these cycles and embracing them. And people give predictions like, well, that's going to fail, or it's going to go wrong, or you're going to make a mistake, and maybe from your perspective it will look like a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In reality, it may be this next stepping stone to lead me to a richer and more fulfilling life.
Absolutely. Yes. I love that.
And that's when you're embracing change, and you can shift and into out of the fear state. Right. And we feel fear whether we're making changes or not, right? That internalize or externalize. It's fear at the core of all of that, right? Yeah. And then we embrace the next steps, and we're like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's exciting. Yeah. Do you have any last thoughts for our listeners on change?
I don't think so. I think just, if a change is presented to you, whether it's wanted or unwanted, we always say, find that space of withdrawal internally to honor or ask yourself those questions, to seek some clarity. Don't be afraid of at least having some understanding. Maybe you make a decision in that moment, maybe you don't, but just in the practice of digging down a little bit deeper to gain that clarity is practice enough to start building that confidence and moving through it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
I
you.
loved it. It was just,
Too.
yeah,
Me
just
too.
makes me want to make some changes.
Let's see what's on the schedule for today. Change.
Just change, embrace it. All right. So thank you everyone for your
Yeah.
time and for joining us. Make sure to like and subscribe, and please share with your friends who maybe are going through a transition time and they're resisting it and can really use this information and support as they're moving into the next change cycle of their life. So, and Christine, we have some great guests lined up. I cannot wait for this fall and
Me
winter
too.
lineup. We're going to have the most amazing conversations
So excited.
with others as well as with each other. So make sure to like and subscribe, people. Please, we
Yes.
love to see, more people joining us, because you know what? We're, growing together.
Yeah. Changing.
Okay, everyone. Thank you so much, and we will see you next time. All right. Bye-bye.